So, guys, you're listening to a April 19th edition of the Splash Act podcast. Today I'm joined by Sid once again, and today just obviously we wish the NBA playoffs were going on. It would have been the second day of the NBA playoffs, which is usually the time, but obviously that's not happening. So we thought we might do a fun little exercise that I kind of got the idea from Bill Simmons actually, but essentially we're gonna do a little redraft of, let's say, the lottery, so the first 14 picks of the 2010 NBA draft. And before I kind of talk a little bit about why, let me just welcome on Sid. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, man. It's good to be back, and yeah, let's get this thing going. So this will be fun.
Yeah. You and I talked. We actually planned on doing this week ago, but I got caught up with some some schoolwork, unfortunately. But I want to before diving into the actual kind of redraft. I think I picked 2010 for a couple of reasons. One, I think that obviously 10 years is a pretty good amount of time to evaluate, okay, what did we hit on, what did we miss on, who might have overachieved, underachieved, etc. So I think 10 years is a pretty good barometer for that. Where while at the same time 10 years is also a good enough time to where these guys are not quite done with their careers, obviously. Like some of the guys that we're going to rattle off still have, I'd say, plenty of good basketball to be played. But so I think 10 years is a pretty good barometer. Not too recent, not too far away. So on top of that, I think it's before we dive into the actual picks. I think you and I both started watching the NBA a little before 2010, but 2010's late, that 2008, 2009, 2010 range was kind of when we started getting really into basketball. Am I correct in saying that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So this is definitely a good time, and I still remember this draft really well, and of course, you and I both being in the DC area, we remember the hype of John Wall coming to DC. So I would say this is a pretty memorable draft.
Yeah, I was about to touch on that. The Wizards having the first pick. There was obviously a lot of excitement in this area, and you and I both, though the Wizards are not our favorite team. I think the Wizards are a team we generally speaking root for, especially in like when they're in the Eastern in the playoffs playing in the East.
Right.
So I definitely think that also made this draft a little special. And I guess just a flashback to 2010, just to kind of bring some context to 2010. This was before your team, the Mavericks, won the championship, right? Right before
Right.
they win the championship.
Hmm.
This is also right before the mega free agency of 2010, where LeBron and Bosh went to Miami, Wade re-upped, Boozer went to Chicago, Amari went to New York, Dirk re-ups with the Mavs, obviously.
Yeah.
Joe Johnson signs that massive deal with the Hawks. I remember that being the first free agency that I really closely followed as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's crazy. To think it's this is kind of the last domino to fall as far as moves goes before
The
the
off
the
season,
craziness. Yeah,
yeah,
the off
yeah.
season. Yeah.
And of course, because I have to, 2010 also the last year Kobe wins the title. Sweet,
Right.
sweet, sweet revenge in seven over the
Yeah.
Boston Celtics for number 16. Obviously, that's obviously a series and a championship that I will always remember. So, anyhow, before we get started, I'll say, because you're the guest here, that I will let you take the first pick and we'll just alternate pick by pick.
Okay.
Before we get into the picks though, I want to say, how when you're kind of thinking about who you would pick, how are you assessing like who to take? And what I mean is, are you assessing strictly off of what we've seen from their career? Are you taking a combination of that and maybe saying like, oh, if they were in a better situation, I think they could have been even better? I'm just curious for how you're kind of assessing
Yeah, a little
who
bit of
you
both.
take at a given time. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. A bit of both. I would say definitely look at what they were able to do in the last decade, and their skill based on their skill set and talent. And then also just take into account the situation, looking at the rundown of the teams and considering where they were at the time, and how maybe some of these a different player could have fit better, uh, given their situation and given how that player turned out. That's how that would be the general way I would approach this.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you. Obviously, for someone to be picked in this, highly in this redraft, you want to see that they actually did something. They, had a meaningful. They've so far had a significant career, but at the same time, in some situations, you might look back and say, "Wow, they were in a really bad situation at this point. Maybe if they were in a better situation, I actually think they could have been better." So I think we're on the same page about that. Obviously, this is just for fun, so whatever
Yeah.
criteria floats your boat, it's just a fun thought exercise. Before I let you use the first pick, I just want to point out it's really interesting because you look back at who was taken, and there were obviously a lot of guys who played and we saw play, but it's kind of crazy how many 10 years, like I said, it's a decent amount of time to assess, for things to happen. It's kind of crazy how many guys are just kind of came into the league and now they're gone. So for instance, I was, as I was doing preparation for this, I'm looking through the list of names. I'm like, dang, Wesley Johnson's out of the league. Epe
Yeah.
Udo out of the league. Greg Monroe. Greg Monroe was good for a moment, and
Yeah.
obviously his game kind of changed up on him, and now he's out of the league. Uh, I'm
Right.
looking. I'm looking. Xavier Henry was picked highly, although he never. He struck lightning in a bottle for a brief second with the Lakers for like a season, but
Yeah.
uh, beyond that, Jordan Crawford looked nice for the Wizards for a year and a half, and then boom, he's out of the league, and it's just interesting. Another deep dive or another guy I saw, Landry Fields. Remember Landry Fields?
Oh yeah, he was on the
Yeah,
Knicks, right?
yeah, he was with Linsanity, and it was just kind of crazy. He was pretty good for what 2, 3 years maybe, and then he went to Toronto, and I think he was out of the league pretty quickly. So, and then
Yeah.
another guy that's out of the league now, but I would say probably is one of the better, not the better, but he's definitely in the top 15 players of this draft. Is probably Lance Stevenson. So
Oh yeah,
it's
that's
just
right.
yeah, it's interesting seeing a lot of guys who have moments in the NBA, or even in Lance's case have quite a few moments, but then 10 years later you fast forward, and they're no longer in the league. It just really goes to show, this it mean I think it means something when a guy sticks around for 10 plus years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But yeah, without further ado, so you are now the Washington Wizards. Who are you taking with the first pick?
You know what? I'm gonna have to stick with the status quo with John Wall. Even
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think he turned out pretty well, and we've seen when John Wall is at his best what kind of impact he's able to make, and being the leader of the Wizards, taking them to the playoffs, and really in those series, I mean, you can perhaps he could have played in certain moments. He could have been better, and um, I think his game. He always had an all around impact, both offensively and defensively. His shooting was spotty. He would get hot at times, but other times
Hmm.
he couldn't rely on it. But I think just his overall impact, you saw it, and I'll never forget that Game 6 shot against the Celtics, and
Yeah.
how yeah, and how great of a moment that was. Even though they ended up losing the series and Game 7 was disappointing, that was still that Game 7 was only possible because of John Wall. And I just look back at it, and it stinks with his injuries from the last couple of years. He hasn't been able to play, but um, I'm also sort of taking the approach of like if you're going back to 2010, like um, you really never know about these things with injuries. They're
Hmm.
always it's always a freak accident, could happen. Unfortunately, you just have to hope that it doesn't. So, but I think based on what I've seen from a healthy John Wall, And just his fit with the team, and how he he's carried himself as a leader of the franchise. You know what? I'm happy with him, and I don't, based on the rest of the guys, there's no one else who I look at. I'm like, dang, like that's a special talent. I wish he was on the Wizards. I do think that John Wall is still like the most talented.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would
Okay.
go with him.
So I hear a lot of what you're saying. This
Yeah,
takes me to my number 2 pick, and we can discuss a couple points. So with the second pick, if I'm the Sixers, and I knowing what seeing these guys' careers play out a little bit, I think the easy number 2 here is Paul George. Now, my question to you is, did would what were some things that maybe you thought put John Wall over Paul George, looking back, 10 years after the fact? Because I do agree with you in that, in terms of like a face of the franchise, a guy to really build a culture around and whatnot, I do think John Wall is the right pick, but I do think there's also a fair argument that Paul George is actually the best player in this draft class.
yeah, I mean that's fair, and I wouldn't necessarily argue that. I would go back to the fit with the Washington Wizards, and just I believe they really benefited from having that star point guard, right? And
Yeah,
then of course they ended up getting Bradley Beal a couple years later. So and I think that was a great backcourt to pair up with. And then so I'm also sort of thinking about that, and say if they get Paul George, they can't really get Bradley Beal with them because they play the same position. Um, I mean, per, per, maybe they could play like to the 2 and 3, but
hmm,
I do think that like with Bradley Beal, John Wall would be a better fit in the backcourt. So I'm also sort of basically going off of that.
sure. Yeah, and I think and I think you bring up a good point. Just kind of the appeal of having like a star point guard, because let's say they take Paul George, who knows who's running the point at that point. And on top of that, I think a very good argument for why John Wall is still the right pick is because John Wall came into the NBA with these first overall pick, face of the franchise expectations, and for the most part, he's lived up to them. Whereas
Yeah.
Paul George, obviously being the 10th pick, he was able to kind of grow into his own in Indiana on a team that had Danny Granger and David West and vets like George Hill. And then now that I think about it, I don't think Paul George has ever been the face. I don't think he's ever thrived as the identity of the franchise. In OKC, obviously he was alongside Russell Westbrook. Right now he's playing next to Kawhi, and then in Indiana, when it was just him, he was pretty frustrated actually. So,
Right.
I think when you factor that in, maybe it actually makes more sense to put John Wall there, because I think he's more of a leader and a face of a franchise. Whereas, though I also think you could argue Paul George has reached a higher, like, I don't know, he's reached a higher peak. Obviously, he's been first team All NBA, been to multiple conference finals, etc. And if in every at least right now, you would probably rank Paul George as a better player than John Wall. But I actually think that a lot of the things you mentioned, in terms of just being the guy and the face of the franchise to build around, I actually think it kind of made sense. John Wall made sense then, and he still makes sense now.
Yeah, yeah, I have to agree, and you're right. Like Paul George, he was all NBA, and the where he was at in 2013, 2014, those years, had he continued being on that level for the rest of the decade, then I would have most likely had him as the number one over John Wall, because I think, yeah, like you said, peak Paul George was better than was I would say was better, but unfortunately for him, his peak didn't last that long. And
Yeah.
now, like he's definitely, it looks that to me that he's better suited as to play that number two role, which is what he's doing right now on the Clippers to Kawhi.
Yeah, and I guess so. So in this draft, the Sixers had the second pick. So imagine if they took Paul George and they had Andre Iguodala, Paul George.
Yeah,
That would be something. That would be something.
yeah, for sure. That would have been pretty cool to see because Philadelphia was also they were a decent team. I believe they were a playoff team in the East. I think
Mhm.
that season they played the Heat in the first round, and then the
Yep.
following season they ended up going to the second round. And granted, Derrick Rose's injury that
Yep.
played a role as well, but um, the Sixers were clearly a team that didn't go down without a fight. So imagine Paul George in that system, what they could have become.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking when I think about some of the best wing defenders that been able to see, Iguodala comes to mind, and Paul George right now definitely comes to mind as well. So just thinking about assuming Paul George becomes Paul George and Iguodala remains Iguodala, just the thought of those two together it'd be like obviously Iguodala's no Kawhi, but defensively speaking, it would be a little reminiscent of what you see right now with Kawhi and PG. So just a fun little what if.
Yeah, that's true.
So back to you. You're now the New Jersey Nets, then New Jersey. They were heading into this offseason with a lot of hopes that they could sign LeBron,
Yeah,
but you're the New Jersey Nets with the third pick. I think I have a pretty good sense of who you're going to take, but who you're going to take.
I'm gonna go with DeMarcus Cousins.
Yeah, that's the right pick.
Yeah, it just um, yeah. I mean, looking at the rest of the list, DeMarcus Cousins, of course, ever since he was drafted, he had all the talent in the world to be one of the best centers. And unfortunately for him, Sacramento wasn't a great situation for him for his early years. So, and I mean, New Jersey, I do think that would have been better. And just knowing what I know now, they ended up trading for Darren Williams,
Yep.
and of course they actually I don't quite remember. Did they have Brooke Lopez in 2010?
They did actually. They did.
Okay. Okay, so I that might have been a bit of a maybe they
Weird
would have had
fit.
to make a move with Lopez. I guess they ended up trading Derek Favors as part of
Or
that
Darren
Darren
Williams. Yeah,
or
yeah.
Darren Williams.
So
So
who knows? Who knows what would have happened? Maybe
yeah.
Boogie's in Utah, but then they had Al Jefferson too in Utah. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
so that's. But no, this is definitely the right pick in that I think it's pretty obvious he's the third best player in this draft.
Right. Yeah.
Um, it's tough because with Cousins, he's such a strong personality, and I love Cousins by the way, but he's definitely a guy where you put him in the wrong situation, and he's obviously not going to see, and he's probably not going to see his ceiling, which is tough. And I think one thing that's underrated about Cousins is the fact that he never through Sacramento, which let's call it how it is. Sacramento in the 2010s was quite the shit show. Cousins, he wanted to stick around towards the end, and then they actually shipped him off. So
Right.
the fact that once he was an all-star, he never wanted out or anything. I think that's definitely something that you don't see as much in today's day and age. And unfortunately, he got hurt, and then signs with the Warriors, and then he goes to the finals, but then is obviously a limited role. Gets hurt again, so now he's technically unsigned, but I expect him to be on a roster next season, whenever next season is.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. And hopefully he'll be able to get back and contribute. But
Yeah.
yeah, he was he definitely had the tools and the talent to be one of the best big men. So the Nets could have been a good situation. We don't know how the dominoes would have fell after that, uh, because that would have definitely changed up a lot. But they did end up having a lot of cap space, and it was just a couple years later when they were the Brooklyn Nets, and they made a couple moves. They re-signed Darren Williams and also traded for Joe Johnson. So I think it's safe to say that regardless of what would have happened, they would have definitely made some moves. And having DeMarcus Cousins would have been a huge addition through the draft.
Yeah. Obviously, these things change once you change one one of the variables. But imagine a world in which DeMarcus Cousins is on the Nets, and then a couple seasons later, the Nets don't trade their lottery pick for Gerald Wallace, and then they keep the pick, and then they take Damian Lillard.
Oh yeah.
Damon, DeMarcus.
Oh my God.
But obviously that would need you would assume that a lot of stuff stays constant. But um,
Yeah.
speaking of, okay, this is just me having a little fun. But speaking of Damon DeMarcus, I honestly wouldn't mind seeing Boogie in Portland next season.
Oh yeah, that'd be interesting. Um, yeah, I would love to see Damian Lillard have more help, and they have the backcourt, so if they can start adding some pieces, a very good big man like Cousins. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that would be good stuff.
especially with all the guys that got hurt this year. You know, they lost Nurkic last year, and he's been out for a while, and then Zach
Yeah.
Collins got hurt also. So that would be interesting seeing. Let's say Carmelo re-ups. It would be interesting seeing Carmelo, Boogie on the Blazers, kind of trying to, I don't know, kind of redemption project, so to speak. That would be definitely an interesting thing.
That'd be cool.
But yeah, I would definitely pull for those guys. But
Oh yeah.
so anyhow, so we're both in agreement. That's probably the right pick. I think we're probably going to be in agreement on number 4 as well. So the fourth pick was the Minnesota Timberwolves. In the actual draft, they took Wesley Johnson,
Right.
but I'm gonna stick with a wing, a swing man, and I'm gonna go for Gordon Hayward.
Okay. Yeah. That's yeah, I can't argue with that. I mean, he was also been a very solid, dependable player.
Yeah, he's also. I mean, he's the last. Ironically, not ironically, but he's the last All Star in this draft. There were only 4 All Stars so far. I assume that's probably how it's gonna go down. But what's really interesting is you list out the 4 All Stars from this draft, and all of them had a pretty bad injury at some point. Gordon
Yeah,
Hayward and Paul George actually had very similar injuries,
that's true.
unfortunately. And then Wall and Cousins actually had similar injuries, both with the Achilles tears. So that's actually really interesting. I hadn't thought about that till just now.
Dang, yeah.
But even before he got hurt, Gordon Hayward was an All-Star. He didn't make All NBA, but he in the 2016-17 season, he was definitely in consideration when the Jazz won. They won, I think, 53 games, and then they beat the Clippers in 7, and then they lost to the Warriors. He was good that year. Obviously, that was before he went to Boston, and then in Boston he got hurt. But he's just, he's got good height, size. He's smart as a player, and he plays both ends, and he's versatile offensively. He could score all 3 levels. So I don't see if he's. I think once you go after these top 4, there's a big kind of gap between Gordon Hayward and the next guys
Yeah.
in terms of the I guess the overall potential or ceiling of said player and what you combine with what you actually saw from the player.
Oh yeah, no question. Yeah, he would have. Hayward's always been a very solid player in both in Utah and now in Boston.
Yeah, he was looking not bad this season before he had a minor injury and he missed some time. He kind of looked like he was bouncing back a little bit
Yeah.
from from the injury, obviously. But yeah, number 4, Minnesota, Gordon Hayward. I'm trying to think what was going on in Minnesota in 2010. Honestly, I think that year that was when they traded Al Jefferson. Not too much, honestly. In Minnesota, for a while, it was pretty bleak, honestly. So
Yeah. I want to say, well, they ended 2011, the lockout year. They ended up being. I know they didn't make the playoffs, but they were definitely a challenge at
they
a
were
given night.
frisky. They were frisky.
Yeah, with Kevin
Yeah.
Love and Ricky Rubio.
Right.
So I mean,
I'm an idiot. Kevin Love's on the team. I totally forgot Kevin Love was on the team. But yeah, okay. So yeah, you're right. Kevin Love, Ricky Rubio, Gordon
yeah,
Hayward. Okay,
that would have
interesting.
fit. Yeah.
Interesting. That's an interesting. Okay. But yeah, but I guess what I more so meant was that at the time, Minnesota was consistently at the bottom of the standings. They hadn't made the playoffs since 2004, so and then they
Right.
lost Al Jefferson.
Yeah,
But this is right before Kevin Love breaks out and becomes an All-Star.
that's right. So I mean, it would have been good timing, and from what I remember, Abby Hayward did he was like from the start in Utah. Like he became a pretty solid piece for him. I think the Jazz made the playoffs as an 8th seed in that lockout year.
Yep,
So
that's right.
I'm inclined to believe that if you put Hayward on the Timberwolves, those teams probably just switch places as far as like I would
Come the
say.
lockout season.
Yeah, yeah. The lockout season was just a
Yeah,
year after, right? So
right.
you know I yeah I would think you add Hayward, you take Hayward out of Utah and put him on Minnesota, then
Yeah,
you can consider them one of the bottom playoff teams.
yeah. No, they were definitely frisky that year when they had Rubio. Rubio was definitely like a little breath of fresh air for them
Yeah,
when he first arrived. But
for
yeah,
sure.
number 4, Gordon Hayward. So now I'm definitely curious to see who you take at 5.
Yeah.
So it's the
Um,
Kings picking. Um, they actually at the time they have reigning Rookie of the Year Tyreek Evans, but
oh yeah.
yeah, I'm curious because I feel like there's a little bit of a drop off. But who you taking with 5?
Ah, man. Well, honestly, it's funny. They ended up they drafted Hassan Whiteside in the second round. So
Uh,
it's like you kind of look back at it. It's like would they just take him with their first pick? I mean, first round pick. He is one of the better players left, and he of course was very solid on the Heat. Those years they had him. Um, if not Whiteside, actually Avery Bradley.
okay.
Um, yeah, he was definitely another very solid, dependable player in Boston. Then he ended up going to the Clippers. Actually, I can't remember. Did he go somewhere else after Boston before the
So it
Clippers?
was Boston, then it was Detroit, and then it was the Clippers.
Oh, okay, that's right,
Yep.
Detroit. Yeah. Yeah, bro. I mean, Bradley's always been one of the better wing defenders in the league, and he's like another like a very good 3-and-D kind of guy.
Yep.
And so I would say it's a toss up between them two. I'll just make it a little interesting and just say Avery Bradley.
Avery Bradley at 5. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I actually to go back. Well, I actually had Avery Bradley 5th on my board. So with
Okay.
Whiteside definitely in the conversation because Whiteside did have a couple really good seasons with the Heat, and he's doing defensively. He kind of floats in and out, but he's definitely been solid for Portland this
Hmm.
year. So yeah, I definitely Whiteside was in the conversation, but you end up taking Avery Bradley 5th, and
Yeah.
that's who I would have had 5th as well. So now I'm at 6. And what's really interesting is this is the team at 6 in this draft is the Golden State Warriors. And what's really interesting is that this was actually their highest draft pick since 2002. So you think about their dynasty,
Oh wow.
it,
Yeah.
it wasn't un, you think about their dynasty, most of their guys were not taken. None of their guys were taken in the top 5. So Steph was 7th, Harrison Barnes was 7th, Draymond's a second rounder, Klay Thompson's 11th, and then obviously they acquire guys like Bogut through trade, Iguodala via sign and trade, and then
Hmm.
KD they eventually sign, obviously. But what's really interesting is they had the 6th pick here, which was their highest pick in recent memory until I guess this coming year most likely. But they have the 6th pick and they actually kind of blow it with Epe Udo.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's just a really interesting thing. The Warriors were really good with the draft, but the highest draft pick they had, they actually kind of missed a little bit. But to be fair, they traded Epe Udo to get Andrew Bogut. So
Right.
I mean, hey, it all kind of worked out for Golden State.
Oh, no question.
But anyhow, so with the 6th pick, I'm torn here because you mentioned Whiteside. Whiteside's definitely in the conversation, but I'm also seriously thinking about Eric Bledsoe because
Yeah.
I kind of look at Eric Bledsoe. He's honestly a lot like Avery Bradley, except he's not as good of a shooter. I'd say a little better of a playmaker, but he's also that physical, gritty, good defensive combo guard. Um, so I'm torn between Bledsoe and Whiteside because I'm thinking, this obviously in 2009 the Warriors get Steph, and they have Monte Ellis at this time. I wonder if I get Bledsoe, would the if I could get plot Bledsoe next to Steph and Clay, is that the same? Is would that be a good fit? I don't know, but
Yeah, it's tough.
yeah,
Tough to
it's
tell.
obviously tough to tell. But you know what? Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go with Bledsoe here because I'm thinking, yeah, I'm thinking that I think Bledsoe. Ooh, that's tough. Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna go Bledsoe. I think Bledsoe has had more. I think he's had more moments in the playoffs than Hassan Whiteside, and I think he's better defensively than Hassan Whiteside. Perimeter defenses, I think there's a little more of a premium on that, getting a good perimeter defender. So I'm gonna go with that to pair with Steph Curry, a young Steph Curry.
Yeah, I can't blame you for that, and perhaps he could have became a very solid, backup point guard to Steph, and um, or just like like assuming, say, Golden State still drafts Klay Thompson and they still trade Monte Ellis later on. I mean, that could have been just opened up some more lineup possibilities and for them.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
yeah, and who knows? Maybe Eric Bledsoe's part of a package to get Andrew Bogut or something. Iguodala, who knows? But
sure,
um,
yeah,
if I'm looking strictly at assuming I don't know if Clay's coming in the future, because obviously that was down the road. Between Bledsoe and Whiteside, if I was just picking a guy to have in a playoff game, I would definitely pick Bledsoe. Even though he's struggled a little bit offensively in the playoffs, I've definitely seen a little more out of him than Whiteside.
yeah, yeah. That's for sure.
So I guess that takes us to seven. I think it's pretty clear who you're gonna take, but so
Yeah,
your seven, which was the Pistons. So who are you
Pistons.
taking?
Yeah, Hassan Whiteside. I think
Yeah,
he with all the other six guys taken at this point, it's I mean, Detroit was clearly looking for a big man, and Greg Monroe, like you said, was solid for the first few years, but then he didn't end up lasting very long. And to Hassan Whiteside's credit, he's still a very productive player today. So knowing that part about him, and of course his potential, and I would definitely go with Whiteside for the seventh pick.
yeah, can't argue with you too much there. Yeah, and I definitely, yeah. I mean, obviously, we had talked about what we had. I mean, both of us considered Whiteside at five, so it makes sense that if he's available at seven, knowing what we know now, it's not
Yeah,
too difficult of a pick.
right.
But what's interesting is Detroit was also in a kind of a funk from 2010 till honestly, even you could argue till now. They've had two playoff appearances, but even Detroit has really struggled to find an identity since
Yeah,
this draft. Since this draft.
sure. Yeah, yeah. They haven't made much noise, so yeah, it's tough. Like to say, compared if they didn't draft this player and they drafted another player instead, how much of an impact would that have made? But yeah, so it really just comes down to like who is the most talented and proven,
Yep.
uh, amongst the rest of the guys available. So I think Hassan Whiteside would be the best available.
Yeah. Um, so now I'm on the clock at eight. I'm
Hmm.
the LA Clippers. So what's interesting here is so I'm actually, I'm strongly thinking about guys like who are still in the league, like Derek and being productive in the league, like Derek Favors or um, Patrick Patterson, who's also still playing, ironically on the Clippers. But
Oh yeah.
I'm actually gonna go with the guy that the Clippers originally took in the draft, and that's Al-Farouq Aminu.
Okay.
And the reason I go there, so he's still in the league. He's productive. Like I mean, he's stuck around, and the thing is, I think, like I alluded to earlier, I think there's more of a premium for guys who, granted, okay, he struggled this year on the Magic, but I don't know if that's how much of that is him versus how much of that is just the Magic
Right.
being the Magic, but or not the Magic being the Magic, but I think the Magic having guys like Aaron Gordon and Jonathan Isaac. But anyhow,
Yeah.
um, I mean, Al-Farouq Aminu, he's shot it decently from three. He's always been a fairly reliable defender, and he's that kind of lanky 6'8" wing that a lot of teams really covet. And he's played in the playoffs, and he's had his moments in the playoffs. Like I wouldn't say had his moments, but he's been reliable in the playoffs. Like it's not like he's just, you know, he's he's actually been better in the playoffs than he is in the regular season when you look at his statistics. So given that, I think him just given his position and the fact that he's had his moments and he's still stuck around, I think that he is a better fit at 8 as opposed to taking a big guy like a Derek Favors who, though he's had numbers, you don't quite think of him as being a key cog to a playoff team as consistently as a guy like Aminu.
Yeah, that's no, I don't blame you at all for that either. Like Aminu is definitely like you said, just a lanky he gives you length. He hustles. He's a decent 3-point shooter, and he was on the Mavs for 1 year, so that's probably the year that I remember him the most from watching him. And yeah, he brought all that to the table, and there were a few extra possessions that he would bring, like a few extra possessions per game, just with his offensive rebounding and giving the opportunities to. So I think you put him in the right situation, he can definitely be very useful even in today's NBA. So
Yep. Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point. He's a pretty good rebounder for a wing.
yeah,
There's many. I think there's been 4 seasons where he averaged more than 7 rebounds a game, which is pretty good for a wing. There were years where he averaged more rebounds than points. So
yeah, I believe it.
yeah, not bad at all. And then so that's yeah. So I guess in this case, the original pick remains who I take here. And what's interesting is he was part of the Chris Paul package to get Chris Paul to the Clippers.
Oh right,
So
yeah.
even if you take him again, maybe he's still part of the same package. So if he's part of that package that brings you Chris Paul, then I don't think it's too bad of a it's not too bad of a pick here.
Yeah,
But
true.
yeah, so now we're at 9, and this was in the original draft. It was Gordon Hayward to the Jazz. Curious to see who you take here.
Yeah, that's I guess they're not able to get Hayward. Uh Honestly, Lance Stevenson, he's
Okay.
he's a guy. I mean, there was a point in time we didn't hear much about him, but at one point he was, of course, the best part of that Indiana team. Very very solid player, triple double threat,
Mhm.
and again, he's another one of those players. He hustles. He this got that defensive tenacity, and offensively he can be a playmaker when you need it. So, uh, I mean, I think he's proven himself. He's had some moments. People, of course, will remember him most for blowing LeBron's ear,
Yeah.
but I think he was a pretty good player. So, yeah, I would have to go with Lance. Um, Really, for me, it was a toss up between him and I guess Derek Favors.
Yeah.
Um, but again, I mean Derek Favors. If we're talking about like having moments and in terms of him like who's proved himself more. I would give that edge to Lance.
Sure. What's super funny is if you didn't take Lance here, he could have gone 10 and he would have still ended up on the Pacers, which is just kind of
Oh,
funny. But
that's true. Yeah.
I agree with you. Lance, he actually led the league in triple doubles in the 13-14 season, and
Yeah.
honestly, he should have been an all-star that year. I really think that him not making the all-star team actually was bad for him because you could see that he was playing with more of a chip, but I don't know if it was helping him in that. I think that he was really trying to show everyone that, I should have been an all-star, and I think he got a little bit out of his comfort zone.
Hmm.
But
That's
yeah,
true.
I mean, he was obviously part of a good Pacers team. He played both sides of the ball. He was an incredibly good rebounder and a playmaker for a guard. Like there's years you look at his stats, he averaged like there's years where he averaged. Let me pull it up. He averaged 7 rebounds a game
Yeah.
as a
That's
guard, which is kind of nuts. And he shot that year, the 13-14 season. He shot 49% from the field, 35 from three, had 7 rebounds a game, 14 points a game, and the Pacers were obviously the 1 seed in the East. So that's pretty good. So I agree with you. He's probably what's interesting is he's out of the league now, but
yeah.
but who knows? Like I definitely think Lance, talented guy for sure, talented player for sure, and but obviously, I'm actually let me pose this question to you. Let's assume he goes to Utah and he shows flashes and stuff. Do you feel like Utah was a better situation for him than Indiana? Because I honestly think that Indiana was. I think he should have never left Indiana. I feel like that was the perfect situation for him, and then kind of went downhill once he left.
Yeah. That I can't disagree with. I mean, yeah, he was clearly at his peak at that time, and um, yeah. Where did he end up going after the Pacers? I can't
So he goes
recall.
to Charlotte,
Charlotte. That's
signs
right.
with Charlotte, then gets traded to the Clippers, then Clippers to Memphis, and then he signs a couple 10-day contracts after Memphis,
Oh
and
man.
then he ends up back in Indiana,
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
Indiana to LA.
Yeah. Man. So yeah, it seems like Indiana was the best place for him. Utah could have theoretically been a a decent place as well. They of course from what I remember with those Jazz teams, I mean they always had this defensive gritty mentality, which I think he could have fit well into. And they don't get Gordon Hayward, and you replace him with Stevenson. That could have been a productive player there, but yeah, it's tough to tell, of course. And Indiana was a great situation. He had Paul George with him, and um, David West, Roy Hibbert. That was a good squad, and I think
Yeah,
that for sure helped him. So it's tough to tell
yeah,
because obviously with this redraft, Paul George doesn't go to Indiana, so we don't know how that would have worked out either if he ended up going to Indiana with that 10th pick.
yeah, definitely. Speaking of Indiana with the 10th pick, I guess I'm on the clock, and I have a lot of options, but none that really just blow me away. But at this point, I think it's fine to take Derek Favors, productive
Hmm.
pro. Nothing, obviously, never reached quite the hype of being a number 3 pick. But I mean, he's had many years where he was double figure points. He's generally above 7 rebounds a game. He's usually shoots it above 50% from the field. Yeah, I mean, this is not a pick I don't feel like it's like a steal or anything at 10, but I think he's definitely a better option than a lot of the guys still on the board. And like I said, he's still in the league, still productive. He's a vet now, obviously, so I'm gonna go Derek Favors.
Favorite. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean he's like you said, a solid vet player. So yeah, I think he still belongs in the top 10 of this draft. And then for the 11th pick with the Hornets, uh, I'd
Traded
go
to
with.
OKC, traded to OKC, but yeah,
Oh yeah, okay.
yeah. I don't
Um,
even know what we're assuming here, but let's just yeah, let's
Yeah.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it.
I'll go with Patrick Patterson. He's
Okay.
another solid vet. I know he was a decent player in Houston. So, and now he's with the Clippers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, still in the league, decent big man. So, I would say with the 11th pick, he one of the better ones available. So,
Yeah. Yeah. He was and he was on that the Raptors team that went to the conference finals in 16 as well and
oh, that's
played.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, he played quality minutes there. Didn't start, but played some quality minutes. And well, he started 9 games in the playoffs.
Hmm.
But okay, can't knock that. Like you said, Patterson, he's a pro. I mean, sorry, he's a vet now, and he's still in the league and still getting minutes. So hard to argue there. So that takes us to 12, and I got a couple options on the. You know what? I think this guy's been honestly. I'm surprised we haven't mentioned his name a single time. Granted, he definitely had a hefty contract that people might have held against him, but I'll take Evan Turner at 12.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's.
Obviously, he never quite hit the number two status, like
Mhm.
second overall pick level. But you know, the thing about Evan Turner was he was always a guy that needed the ball in his hands. It wasn't a great shooter, like from the outside, so he was kind of more of like a playmaker, do it all, kind of jack of all trades guy. So he had some good years in Philadelphia and Boston, and then he had some moments in Portland, but I think the problem was Portland, and ironically, you and I talked about this when he signed with Portland in 2016. He was signed to this hefty contract and we were just kind of confused because they already had Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, and we weren't
Right.
sure how he would fit when next to those guys. But he's I mean, he's obviously still around. He's still a pro, and or he's a vet now, and he's stuck around and always managed to play solid minutes and crack rotations of teams. And he's played also going back to that 2012 Philadelphia Boston series. He started on that Sixers team that went 7 with Boston. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna go Evan Turner. I'm gonna go Evan Turner. I'm surprised. I should have in hindsight, I honestly probably should have taken Evan Turner at 10 over Derek Favors, but it's all
Yeah.
good. Yeah,
Yeah.
in
It's a
hindsight,
toss up.
but
He would.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna go Evan Turner at 12 to the Grizzlies.
Yeah. Think that could have been a good fit. Yeah. So, 13th pick, Toronto. Uh,
Yep.
yeah. Not too many guys left. Who were notable. I mean, I guess Landry Fields. I mean, we did talk about him briefly. He was a pretty decent player at the start of his career. Jordan Crawford is another option. I mean, uh, a decent option off the bench.
I think Ed Davis is still in the league as well,
Oh,
who
yeah,
was the actual pick. Um, I'm just gonna toss out a couple names.
yeah.
Rivas Vasquez didn't stick
Ooh,
around too long, but had some moments in the NBA, and Greg Monroe as
yeah.
well, though he didn't stick around. I'm just throwing a couple names out just to get the gears turning.
Right, yeah. I guess I would throw in Greg Monroe. Now, now
Greg
that I think
Monroe.
about it, yeah. I think he was still like good enough, like of a big man at that point where that would he still deserve to be taken as part of the lottery picks. So yeah,
Okay.
I would probably
Yeah.
go with Greg Monroe.
Yeah, and real quick point on Monroe, he was good. Like
Yeah,
he, I mean, he averaged double double for a year. There were years where he was like he was like at 9.7, 9.6, 9.3 rebounds. He was always a good passer for a big man. He averaged 3.5 assists for a center, which is pretty good. But once he signed with, and then he got a max contract with Milwaukee. So
Oh
I
yeah,
mean
that's right.
that has to mean something,
Hmm.
but yeah, the league just kind of changed up because he wasn't exactly the fastest, wasn't a versatile defender, kind of more of an old school back to the basket kind of guy who also so and like I said, wasn't exactly versatile defensively, and the league just kind of changed up on him really quickly. Also, was never a great outside shooter. So
Yeah, yeah, that definitely makes sense as to why the way the league was transitioning, he wasn't
yeah,
able to be as much of a threat. Yeah, I mean, like you said, he played well enough to earn a max contract, so that speaks for something.
yeah. And real quick, interesting point. This is not super relevant, but in the 2018-19 season, so last season, it was his last year in the NBA. He
Hmm.
played for three teams in the same season, and it's so he played for Toronto, Boston, and Philadelphia. And I just find that ironic because obviously the three of them are in the same division. All of them were top four seeds, and in theory, could have saw themselves as potentially coming out the East. So I just find that interesting. In 1 year, he bounced around those three teams.
Yeah, if he'd stayed in Toronto, it just had been on their bench, he might have had a ring.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Ironically, he was on the Sixers bench when Kawhi hits the shot.
oh wow, yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
but he obviously wasn't playing very much. He was just kind of playing garbage time. But I do remember I was watching the end of Game 7 between the Sixers and the Raptors the other day, and I for a second when they call timeout, I paused it. I'm like, holy crap, that's Greg Monroe, because I just didn't remember seeing him in Philadelphia. But yeah, it's sure enough, it's him sitting
Yeah,
on the bench and dapping up Joel Embiid.
wow,
Yeah.
how about
So
that?
that's your last pick.
Hmm.
And so to close out the lottery, I'm now taking the role of Daryl Morey in the Houston Rockets, and
Hmm.
I have to admit I'm a little bit biased when it comes to this pick, but I actually think it makes sense on a lot of ends. And I don't even know if you realize this, but he was undrafted in this draft class, so I'm counting him as part of this, part as part of the pool of players. I'm gonna go
Okay.
with Jeremy Lin.
Oh yeah, yeah, you have to. Yeah.
So and here's my thought process. It's ironic because Lynn obviously ends up in Houston,
Right.
so him going to the Rockets. But now, okay, so this is not basketball related, but strictly from a marketing and getting your fan base excited perspective. Houston, obviously, they still have Yao Ming at the time, though he's about to retire due to injury. Houston,
Hmm.
huge Chinese Asian population. This would have been definitely a fan favorite pick if we did a redraft and they took Jeremy Lin. So that's one point. Though I do think that one thing that gets slept on is that he was a solid point guard in the league for 9 years. Granted, he's not in the league anymore. Sorry, he was in the league for 9 years. He was solid for, I'd say maybe 6 of those years. When you look at his, you go to his career statistics. His first year, he doesn't play that much in Golden State, and then every year or every stop that he's at from there going forward until Toronto, when he's on the bench for the championship team, he's in double figures, right?
Yeah.
So he was always like even he might not have been a championship level starting point guard, but he was always worthy of starting on a playoff team, and definitely worthy of being like a sixth or seventh man, first guard off the bench for like a solid like potential playoff contender. I look no further than the 2013-14 Houston Rockets. He started about half the games, didn't start in the playoffs, but that team was a 4 seed. They had James Harden, Dwight Howard, and he was still averaging 13 points a game and shooting pretty well from the field. So I think because of the peak of Linsanity, people kind of sleep on. People act like he just sucked for the rest of the decade, which like is definitely not the case. I unfortunately some people think that, but if you look closely, he was actually pretty solid and reliable. So that's another point. And then the last point I have about why him um, is primarily just that I don't think very few players in this draft, especially the ones that aren't all-stars, none of them ever hit the peak that Jeremy Lin hit.
Yeah. Oh, there's no question about that. I mean, yeah, I did not know that 2010 was the year that Jeremy Lin entered the league undrafted. So, yeah, no, I mean, and Houston, actually, that makes so much sense too. I mean, just like you said, with the whole like they already had Yao Ming and just the Asian community and integrating him and yeah, Houston ended up becoming a contender. So of course he ended up there only say 3 years later, or 3 years later. So yeah,
Yeah.
it would have made sense looking back at it.
Yeah, and hey, who knows? Daryl Morey and Mike D'Antoni always seemed like they were destined to kind of be a partnership. And obviously, Linsanity happened under Mike D'Antoni. So who knows? Maybe you bring Linsanity to Houston. I don't know. But I really think that, sure, you could make an argument that some players, I don't know if there's too many players still on the board that you could argue are quote unquote better. Um, Honestly, I don't even know if there's any that you could make a credible argument are better. But on top of that, like I said, I really think that he's been a little underrated just because people assume that he just tapered off and was irrelevant after Linsanity. But he was always double-figure points, 4 or 5 assists. He was usually a good like not energy, like a spark off the bench. He was the sixth man in Charlotte when they made the playoffs in 2016, and he played quality minutes there. So I'm gonna go. Yeah, I think Jeremy Lin to round out the lottery.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I definitely I knew I so funny, just a funny point. I knew that you would be on board with me taking Lin at 14, but I also didn't want to show my hand. I was worried you might take him at 13. So, I was like, that's why I actually intentionally did not mention him, just because I really wanted to get him at 14, just because of all the things I just outlined. Just seemed a little too perfect to get him right at 14. And you
Yeah,
know I
close
love
it out.
Jeremy Lin. You know I love
Yeah.
Jeremy Lin. So it makes me very happy to say that if we did a redraft, he would have gone in the lottery.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. Like it was fitting. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a good way
Well,
to close it out.
yeah. So definitely this type of exercise is definitely an interesting one, and we're approaching the hour mark, so that's not a bad place to stop. But um, real quick before I let you go, since today is, like I said, it would have been the second day of the NBA playoffs. I'm just curious. Obviously, season got halted, but let's say we did have a normal season. Uh, I guess two questions I just want to lob at you. So the first question I have is, as a Mavs fan, which based on the fact that they were probably going to be what, 6 or 7, or
Yes.
maybe 5, which team did you actually want to see? Like you felt the Mavs would have had the best chance of advancing against this year.
Ooh, well, based on the way the standings were left off, I would say the Nuggets.
The
Um,
Nuggets. Okay.
yeah, the Mavericks they're currently they left off as the seventh seed, and right now it's the Clippers and Nuggets. They're just a game and a half apart from each other, with Clippers being at number 2, Nuggets being at number 3, and I will say I would definitely would not want them to start the playoffs against the Clippers. I don't
Yeah.
see them going that matchup going too well for them. The Nuggets, of course, the Nuggets would still be the favorite. They'd be a great challenge, and they won their first round series last year against the Spurs, which must have been a very big teaching tool for them. It's a young team, and getting through that series against a veteran Spurs team coached by Popovich, that's a good way to kind of start off for your career going in the playoffs. I think going up against the Spurs and figuring them out. So I would say the Nuggets are a bit battle tested. So it would still be a very, very difficult matchup for the Mavericks, but I still think that versus the Lakers or the Clippers, I would rather them play the Nuggets. And
Yeah,
when the Mavs and Nuggets have played each other this year, they've had some good games. And ironically, the last game the
I
Mavs
was about to
played,
say. Yeah.
yeah, it was against Nuggets. They actually won pretty handily. So, uh, yeah, I think it's a series that could actually go 6 or 7 games, and which even if the Mavs were to lose, I think that would be a good experience for Luka and this young team that the Mavs have right now.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely hear you. Like you want as a Mavs fan, you probably would way rather see the Nuggets as opposed to Paul George and Kawhi in the
Yeah,
playoffs. But yeah, I definitely hear you there. The second question I had before we go is if let's just based on what you had seen, who would you have bet on to win to be this year's NBA champion?
man. Honestly, right now, I would have still picked the Clippers.
The Clippers?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's based on if assuming we would see the Lakers and the Clippers in the Western Conference Finals, which I think was what most fans were anticipating. I just when breaking down the matchups, I do think that the Clippers they match up very well, and they Kawhi versus LeBron. I would take Kawhi right now, like Pete Kawhi over even though LeBron is playing amazing, and he's
Mhm.
definitely defied his age and everything, but I do think from a matchup standpoint, Kawhi he can definitely make him work, and he's an elite defender, and he can definitely give LeBron the work as well. And
Yeah.
having Paul George, he's another is another weapon, and just the Clippers are just their style of play would be better suited in a 7 game series,
Yeah,
in my
I'm
opinion.
with. Yeah, that's fair. I would obviously pull for the Lakers if in that case, but I have said all year that I think the Clippers are more built for the playoffs. I
Yeah,
trust I trust that Clippers crunch time five more than the Lakers, only because with the Lakers it's like I trust LeBron, I trust AD, I trust Danny Green, but then it's like okay, am I really do I really want JaVale McGee or Dwight Howard or Rajon Rondo out there going up against Lou Will, Patrick Beverly,
yeah,
Montrezl Harrell, etc. But yeah, so with that, um, I think that's a good. Oh, the last thing I will say, and I'm sure you feel the same way, is that I do hope we get a playoff series between the Clippers and the Lakers while these two nucleuses are intact. But
oh yeah, be
yeah,
disappointing if we didn't. So yeah, it'd
yeah,
be good to see these two teams go at it, and I'm with you. I would still pull for the Lakers, but yeah, from an objective standpoint, I would pick the Clippers to win.
yeah. But yeah, with that, I guess that's a good place to wrap up. So hope everyone's staying safe and healthy, you included, Sid. And once again, I want to thank everyone for listening. Uh, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe on and review on whatever platform you're listening to, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or SoundCloud. And once again, I want to thank Sid for joining me today, and we'll catch you soon.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you having me. Appreciate y'all listening to us. This was fun.